Welcome to Protecting Our Most Vital Resource, Working Together for Watershed Conservation. In this webinar series, we'll hear from 3 different regional initiatives about their watershed conservation work. In this part, WHC's Director of Business Development, Sarah Cook, speaks with Kevin Roebling of the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks about their water quality program.
Good afternoon, Kevin. Thank you for joining WHC as we explore water conservation specifically in the state of South Dakota. So just want to introduce you quickly before we get into our interview style chat around the issue. Kevin was selected as South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks, I apologize, in 2021. So we're going on 2 years now, as we just confirmed. And Kevin was a center at South Dakota State University. So he has a little football background, but more importantly, he's always had a passion for the outdoors, and in particular, hunting and fishing, and is here to kind of talk about in South Dakota how conservation, community, and action can come together to improve water resources. That said, Kevin, we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, coming off a huge pheasant hunt, the state and the governor. And really, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're doing in the state and what are your priorities.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the opportunity here this afternoon. And yeah, it's really an exciting time in South Dakota. A little bit about our department. Our mission is to serve and connect people and families to the outdoors through responsible and effective management of our state's parks, fisheries, and wildlife resources. That one really hits home for me: serve, connect, and manage. And that includes the terrestrial aspects, the aquatic aspects, and today we'll be talking a lot about the water component of that serve, connect, manage. We have about 500 employees in the agency. All 500, I would say, are extremely passionate about the next generation, ensuring the quality of life in South Dakota continues for not just the current generation, but for those future generations. So water has to be a big part of that conversation. Soil health, water quality, all of those things that then result into productive, healthy habitats for the wildlife and the fish to survive and prosper. So yeah, excited to be here. We're working on some really neat things in South Dakota, and just eager to have a few minutes and have a conversation about South Dakota and water in general. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for illustrating those connections. And I think one thing that our audience, which is, as you know, largely corporate, you just attended your first conference this summer with us, and we were really glad to have you in Detroit. And I think one thing that your office and your partners at Second Century can help our members understand is the intersection between private, public, and government. So tell me a little bit about how you're able to achieve success for watershed benefits using your office and those 500 staff as a primary resource.
Yeah, I mean, one thing early on I learned in my career is the world's built on relationships. And quite honestly, that is how we're going to achieve the task at hand, especially such a large issue at hand here when it comes to water quality, water conservation, and all those things associated with it. So I'm committed to those partnerships. I'm committed to building more relationships with egg producers, with landowners, with sportsmen and women of the state, even soccer moms, right? I mean, everybody in the urban cities and across America. It's important because water is key. I mean, water is central to life, and we all want to make sure that we pass that water on to the next generation in the quality and the maybe a lot of times better quality than we actually have it here today. So it's been a huge priority of mine to collaborate with private and public partnerships and entities and corporations to really escalate and elevate this overall call to action. I call it a call to action because I feel like that's what it is. I have 2 4-year-olds and a 2-year-old. I have 4-year-old twins and a 2-year-old. And I want to make sure in 50 years they have resources better than we have them today. And I'm committed to that. I'm passionate about that. And that is why I am absolutely committed to elevating that private, public, governmental partnership that I believe is going to take us to the next level.
That's a really good answer. And I love that you mentioned partnerships and collaboration. And, given your experience, which I guess of the water objectives has been supported by one of your projects in the state of South Dakota?
Yeah, so we have a couple of really awesome and exciting things going on in South Dakota right now. One of the main projects that we just are launching is called the Big Sioux River CREP. And CREP stands for Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. It's actually a federally funded program, and the state then comes in and matches those federal funds to enroll lands into CRP, but not just enroll lands into CRP, enroll lands into a specific watershed within that area. And then obviously the next part of that is providing public access to that area, which is really a win-win-win for the communities up and down. I'll say our populous area of South Dakota. We only have about 850,000 people living here, but that whole side of eastern South Dakota would be influenced and impacted by that Big Sioux River watershed project. The main thing there is water quality. That's really what we're hoping to impact in a big way. Nutrient runoff, those sorts of things, but also soil health. I mean, that's going to be a big component. Setting those acres aside for 15 years and then coming back and farming those acres is only going to be more productive into the future of those soils. So there's a lot of really win-wins there, but water conservation is a big part of that Big Sioux River watershed project, and really cleaning up that river as well. That's going to be a big objective moving forward.
Interesting. So I love the idea of using an existing tool like a CREP to facilitate this at the state level and across potentially stakeholder barriers and relationships. And because relationships, as you've self-identified, are critical to this process, who are your key stakeholders and who are you working with to advance water conservation and water quality efforts under this project?
Yeah, none of this is possible without the coordination and collaboration with private landowners, i.e. ag producers. That is the absolute most critical component of all of this. In South Dakota, I mean, we're a private land state. 80% of South Dakota privately is owned. And we need to, and we continue to, develop better and more relationships with those landowners, with those producers. And I'm a ag guy myself. I actually just rolled a bale of hay out to my cows over lunch break because it's Halloween, So anyway, I won't be home until after dark. But long story short, that is really the thing we're looking at. That's a private industry. It's the largest industry we have in South Dakota. It's the economic engine of South Dakota, agriculture. And without, producer buy-in, without landowner buy-in of these types of programs, we will not be successful. So I'm absolutely committed to bringing the wildlife conservation community and the agricultural community together. And that's where those relationships then again come into play.
Yeah, and I love that you just did that today, because I didn't have that kind of day, although my kids were putting on their Halloween costumes. But nonetheless, so you mentioned there the critical relationship. What are some of the challenges to that success? What are some barriers to entry maybe for some of the landowners, and or on your side, on the department side, barriers to entry with your primary stakeholders? How do you kind of approach those, and then how do you get over them to further this project?
Yeah, when you talk about putting perennial grass in a landscape for 15 or 20 years, I mean, you're setting row crop acres out of production. I mean, you're taking potentially marginal lands, saturated wet soils, gravelly hilltops, high salinity soils, and you're saying, you know what, we're not going to farm those acres for 15 or 20 years. We're going to set them into perennial grass, and really then, do all the things we already talked about with water quality, the filtration, the riparian buffer strips, all of that. The biggest barrier, though, is profitability, making sure that aspect of doing what I just mentioned cash flows, because ultimately they're running a business and they have to make those financial decisions to keep food on the table, to make sure their farm and ranch operations are profitable. And that has been one of the biggest barriers of enrollments, of that incentive part of it. And we really do focus on profitability. There's a thing called Every Acre Counts we're working with SDSU on. What they're doing right there is there's 46,000 acres that are in a very, I would say, highly analytical computer software program, looking at every single acre of that field and all the input costs, and then obviously the yields that come off of those acres. And they're identifying then acres that aren't very productive, the unproductive acres that are, we call them net zero acres. They're not making them any money. A lot of times they're net loss acres. So we're setting those acres aside, and then we're looking at the profitability. If that was in, let's say, a perennial grass program, conservation type program, and taking those acres out of production and then looking at that field as a whole then and seeing what their profitability is in the long run. And that's really what's going to drive conservation, because it's a business, and I 100% respect that and understand that.
Yeah, so I mean, and I get that, and I think our members, our corporate members, are facing that same challenge: is what's the return on investment? What's
Mhm.
that payback period? And how do I do that credibly is also part of that process. So, if that's the biggest challenge, I think you're going to hear that in our audience being echoed in their own efforts to try to resolve water crises, water usage, water mandates, all the pressures that we're facing across the globe, really, in terms of having high quality water for both community and productive, to your point, usage. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that you illustrated. And I'm wondering, what advice would you give to our other partners who maybe aren't in a government role, they're in a private sector role, to overcome that barrier, to make that conversation easier, even to just be open and honest about it and say, look, you might not see a return for 7 years versus your 18-month window of your normal operations, but look at the co-benefits and look at the gains, the improved health, improved biodiversity, other kinds of things. So how, it's really the leader of your state's conservation organization, how do you have that conversation, and what recommendations do you have for our corporate partners in this session?
Yeah, it is absolutely the long game. I mean, I say that all the time. We're playing the long game here. We're playing the 50, 100 years out, and we're not going to see the return on investments year 2, 3, 4, 5. We might see some in 5, but we're going to see some major quantifiable, differences, 15, 30, 50 to 100. And that's something that, the actions we do today might not benefit tomorrow. They're going to benefit 50 to 100 years from now. It's like planting a tree today. It might not grow, and you might not see it grow, to a point where you want to see it be a certain size per se. That doesn't mean we don't do it. That doesn't mean we say, you know what, this isn't going to benefit me directly tomorrow. We're going to set this aside. That's why, again, going back to those partnerships, those relationships, I think are absolutely critical. The biggest advice is don't give up. I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, you're going to have a lot of folks say, well, that's just crazy. You can't change a whole entire watershed. Well, we can if we do it together, right? We can if we bring in, enough collaboration across the landscape. The Big Sioux watershed is 3.8 million acres. We're wanting to enroll 25,000 acres up and down that riparian area. So really then, filtration, sediment issues will be resolved with that. We'll see better water quality. We'll see less runoff of nitrogen and phosphorus. That's kind of our leading 2 nutrient-rich things that are occurring right now in our lakes and streams across South Dakota. So we're taking it on together, and it's an exciting time because, again, water it's the foundation of life, and everybody understands that, and everybody can rally around that. I mean, that's what the beauty of this conversation is.
Yeah, and I haven't asked you this before in our previous conversations, but you just mentioned some nutrients that when I lived in New Orleans, was on a water synergy project with other industries outside the cement industry and with other partners, including the states. How do you see and how do you relate, I guess, the objectives of Big Sioux project to your immediate private landowners, such that it improves potentially cross-state relations in terms of, okay, well, what comes downriver affects somebody else's ability to comply and access to clean water. So I'm curious how, as a department head, you navigate that, and if you've been able to make those connections both for your adjacent agency folks, as well as your personal interest and your state's interest in the private land ownership. That's something I've never asked you, so sorry to put you on the spot about that, but I figured you'd have a good answer.
No, it's a great question, and I would say the number one thing is never point fingers. Never point fingers at potentially where those nutrient-rich things are coming from, per se, because again, we're all in this together. Here's an example. We launched a Jim River CREP. We call it the James River Watershed in 2009, and the goal there was 100,000 acres. We scaled it back to 80,000 in 2013 because funds were limited. We now just re-enrolled that up to 100,000 acres once again. And what we've seen there is when you have a community that rallies around a concept, you'll see pockets of enrollments up and down that watershed. So it's really a you form coalitions, you sit and have coffee, you go to the gas stations, you talk to producers, and that's what it takes. It takes those localized, relationships, and we can never ever point fingers at each other, because that's never going to get us anywhere. Again, we're all in this together. I'm a firm believer of that. And ultimately, that's how we accomplished enrolling over 85,000 acres in the Jim River watershed. And those acres are acting and they're working today just like we intended them to do. Filtering nitrogen, filtering phosphorus, cleaning that Jim River Valley, which then dumps right into the Missouri River, which then dumps in the Mississippi, and then it goes all the way down to the coast. So absolutely, everything we do upstream is going to go downstream. And that's why it's so critical to continue this practice up and down all of our watersheds in North America.
And do you get feedback from those partners? So the 85,000 enrollees, I mean, that's incredible. And so much so that you were able to renew that effort for another doubling down on that success. So what's the feedback from your partners in that, from the folks you're having coffee with and you're meeting out in the community?
It's been ultimately pretty positive. I mean, there's been a lot of, I would say, hesitancy at first, because you're again taking row crops out of production. I mean, back in the 1980s and 70s, farming in the 80s were really rough. I mean, they were a tough time, and that's when CRP came into the fold, because producers couldn't cash flow anything at that point. Commodities were in the tank, but now we're looking at really strong commodities, at least for now. And they do this all the time. It's a constant roller coaster. And there are times where a producer says, you know what, I'm done riding the roller coaster. I'd rather just, have some steady income coming in. I know this field over here isn't that productive. I'm going to take it out of row crops, put it into grass. It's next to the river or the watershed, and make sure then that's profitable to the producer. And those conversations have grown through time as the word got out as far as what kind of programs and opportunities we offer. The really neat thing of all this is the public access component with it. You can hunt and fish on it. I mean, that the public can come, utilize those grassland acres for hunting and fishing as well. So it provides an incredible amount of recreational opportunity, an incredible amount of economic driver within these small communities that rely on tourism, in a sense, for hunting in particular, pheasant hunting. Hunt the Greatest, we call it, is our campaign. We are the pheasant capital of the world, and we're very proud of it. So come pheasant hunt in South Dakota.
I will see you next year's event. But
Perfect.
To that end, I think you've made a nice connection too. And this is off our previous conversations of the topic here, but you just connected two different economic streams in your state around one single conservation objective. Now, granted, it is an important decision for your primary landowners, and it's one that no one takes lightly, and they shouldn't. But interestingly enough, there's a number of benefits that are derived from that single family institution's decision to do that, whether it's economically driven, whether it's kind of altruistic, as we love in the wildlife habitat world, we'd love to have pure decision making. But in the end, if you're able to offer another more stable financial solution, and you're seeing the benefit to other economic institutions as a state, I mean, how do you transform that? How do you scale that? And can we share that? Can we bottle that up and package it across state lines and even international boundaries to try to advance these initiatives for the benefit of everybody, whether you're the soccer mom you alluded to earlier, or you're the family making that decision to invest in their property for something bigger than their own financial stability. It's community stability, really. So I'd be interested to hear how you've been able to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is that long game, and we're starting, you see the trickle effect in economics occur from even enrolling a quarter section, 160 acres, and then you see it, expand into 1,000 acres and 10,000 acres and 50,000 acres. And as you build that platform, that foundation of, this program, there's definitely some economic trickle across, I would say even nationally.
That's cool.
In regards to just the overall change in water quality of the Jim River in particular, or the Big Sioux, the next project we're working on, or, just the overall recreational quality of life component. That is a huge, huge driver of mental health and stability, and making sure, we have these awesome things to do in the outdoors. And that's what this is about as well. As much quality of life, water quality, profitability to the producer, it's all bottled together and packaged up very nicely. And that's something that it's hard to measure. It's like the old MasterCard priceless commercial or whatever. So I'm not getting that wrong. But long story short, it is hard to measure. But we do quantify, economics in regards to the hunting industry, the tourism industry, and agricultural industry. And it's big. It's monumental. Billions of dollars coming to South Dakota or leaving South Dakota because of those three industries in particular.
And what I'm really excited to illustrate for our audience is that that's around a water quality priority. You can have state economic success around something that's really good for everyone, not just our human environment and our built environment, but also wildlife, to your point, and our wellness. So I'm really excited to hear that. Now, if I'm a private landowner in your state and I want to participate, what kinds of resources can I expect out of this CREP program, whether it's on the James or the Big Sioux? How do I get involved? What can I expect? And what do I need to do to be able to participate in this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we are prioritizing here in the department is I call them habitat armies. We create habitat armies, conservation coalitions. And what we're doing, which a lot of other states don't do, is we are meeting our customer where they're at. We're literally driving down driveways, knocking on doors, and talking about conservation, talking about these programs, talking about the benefits of soil health and water quality that comes with CREP, CRP, comes with a working lands program, those types of things. So we're knocking on their doors. We're saying, hey, do you want to have a conversation about habitat? Now is not a good time. We'll come back. A lot of times it's over coffee. A lot of times it's over a gate or a panel or the hood of a pickup truck. That's exactly what we want to do, is build those relationships early on. And when the question's right, you ask it. I mean, you can't just go in there and say, hey, what about this? You got to build that relationship. You got to, make sure that those producers feel comfortable with the conversation you're having. And then talk about enrolling lands into conservation, because it is a big, big decision for these producers and a life-changing one. If at that, because they built that farm up, they built that ranch up with so many acres of row crops, and this would be taking some of those acres out, setting those aside for conservation, setting those aside for the benefits of water quality, soil health, wildlife benefits, all of that. And like we talked about already, it's occurring across South Dakota, and it's really exciting to see.
It's interesting. So, I heard another little nugget in there that I think our corporate partners might benefit from, meeting people where they're at. So put on your city hat or put on your company hat, the people you work with to get the funding to do these programs. How do you frame it for them too, so that they're investing in your state, they're investing in this program? And then if I'm a company that maybe I'm not in South Dakota, but I'm elsewhere, and I want to meet someone where they're at, what would you say to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, the narrative somewhat changes for the audience, obviously. I mean, when you talk to, let's say, somebody that's interested in the conservation aspects of it, I mean, you talk more about the benefits to the wildlife communities in that area. I mean, one thing that I will talk about all the time is the grasslands are the fastest declining biome in North America, in this world. Think about that, in this world. And that's scary to me. And we live right in the middle of one of the most intact grasslands in North America, which is in South Dakota. And we're really proud of that. And we want to keep that conservation model alive. But when you put on, a different constituency hat, you're going to have to tread lightly. I'll say that at times, because you don't want to ever point fingers and create, opponents or proponents of a certain conversation. I think the big thing is find the commonality to what the conversation's about, because everybody's got something in common when it comes to water quality, soil health, all of those things we already talked about today, and focus on that piece of it. Now, as corporations in, let's say, California or out in, I don't know, the East Coast, for example. I'm a South Dakota kid,
Philly.
so I don't got much, so sorry, folks.
That's okay.
One of the things I'd say to that, though, is everything we do across the landscape impacts us regardless of where we live, especially, carbon sequestration conversations, making sure we keep our grassland biome intact, making sure the water that we're sending downstream the Missouri River into the Mississippi River is clean. All of those things are impacted as a community, as a populace, right? As a United States. So I think these conversations should not be within state boundaries. at all.
Yeah.
They need to be across state boundaries. We all are in this together. I say that all the time because I'm a firm believer of that. And that's just something that, that's where it's kind of a call to action for all of us, corporations,
Okay.
private industry, public facing folks like myself, the government. It's a call to action that we all rally together and we take on this issue at hand and address it and take it on head on and make a positive impact for our kids. Again, it's not about us. It's about those future generations. And it's about the societal past as well to continue, the business practices that are profitable and continue the economic drivers of society. I mean, that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I like that answer, and that it's you've got to know your audience, but you related back to your earlier statement around it's not about pointing fingers. So let's put aside how we all got here. We all share a little bit of the blame, but we all have a common need, and I think that that's something that is much more positive and easier to associate with because we're all there, right? So it's a really good equalizer in that, and I appreciate your insight in that. So my last question is kind of around that. If you had, say, a magic wand and you could further water quality in the state of South Dakota and beyond, how would you use that magic wand, and who would you need to help you carry that out? That's the piece I didn't share with you earlier either. Who else do you need?
Yeah.
Who else do you need to be successful?
Well, a magic wand would be nice. It would be fun. I would say one of the biggest pieces of this is the economic driver of it, funding. I mean, that's going to be a lot of this does hinge on funding. Would a Big River CREP or a Jim River CREP be available if we didn't have 75% of the federal funds to match it with state dollars and in volunteer donations, if you will? We get a lot of that as well because they believe in this. The other part of this, magic wand conversation, I would say though, would be awareness. I mean, it's this whole idea that making sure folks are aware that the actions of today are impacting tomorrow and 100 years from now, and then really coming together as a community, as a society, and addressing this, holistically without pointing fingers, without becoming divided. It's hard to do in this day and age, it seems. And so those are some of the things I would really want to focus on. But the magic wand part, yeah, if we had another large sum of dollars, I really think we could do a lot of good with it and put it towards wildlife conservation, put it towards, these actions or these programs we talked about today. And that always does seem to be one of the limiting factors. I'm always asking, folks, corporations for dollars to help fund stuff just like we're talking about here today, because profitability is absolutely key. It is. It absolutely makes or breaks a program.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. WHC is really, really happy to help continue this conversation with you and your state, as well as your stakeholders within your state. And I think, one thing that our members may not be aware of is how to effectively impact those funded initiatives. I mean, there's grant money available. Okay. But what does that mean if you're a private interest that you want to be a contributor to that? Not so much as a family or as an individual, but maybe as a corporation. So, we're really happy to have this conversation today to start that dialogue. Hopefully it's an extension of some conversations you had at conference this June. And we really would like to learn more. And if our audience would like to learn more, are you okay with us sharing some information in the chat about your state, your programming, and your partners?
Absolutely. And one thing that I would just like to share lastly is the fact that we're looking large scale here. This isn't a 100-acre field. This isn't a 10-acre plot. This isn't, this is large scale. This is an entire watershed we're trying to impact. So it is a little bit, I don't know. Sometimes people are like, Roland, you're crazy. Well, sometimes I am, because I really think that's where it starts. And I really want to see these changes, this human behavior change happen at a large scale. And that starts at the watershed. And it's exciting because people really do care. We have a ton of awesome agricultural producers in this state and across the nation that passionately care about what they're leaving behind to their children, their grandchildren, and future generations. And the same goes for folks living in the city. There's a lot of commonality there. And the best stewards of the land are the ones that are operated every single day. And I'm a firm believer of that, and they respect that. They love what they do. They love passing that lifestyle on to the next generation. And they want to make sure it's sustainable for future generations to come. So vested interest, large scale interest, and yeah, I'd be more than happy to work with any corporation or entity that's interested in getting to learn more about what we're doing here in South Dakota.
Great. Well, I think this is a good first step, and we're definitely going to be, presenting this conversation alongside some industry adjacent partners in other states, as well as NGOs and other groups that have an agricultural interest, but also are dealing with a different set of water issues around scarcity, not just quality, and equity around access. So I think it's a great place for your organization to plug in, for your agency to plug in, and also, as I said, we'll put in the chat some additional resources to connect folks to you directly. For those of you who are interested, you can reach out to myself or Dan Lateau at WHC. You know us. If you don't, shame on you. We already know who you are. No, but we're here to help, and we definitely want to enable this action. And frankly, Kevin, I think, that sentiment about the scale of your project at Big Sioux is really how the world is going to have to think about solutions for some of the environmental and social issues that are facing us today. It cannot be done by 100-acre planting or it's got to be holistic, inclusive, right? And looking at acknowledging those financial, biodiversity, and community benefits for multiple stakeholders to consume, not just one or two, but everyone. So I think what you guys are doing is a great example for us to look at, and also especially because you do have some upstream impacts. And hopefully, I know a lot of our members have downstream assets. So you're potentially reducing their costs to clean the water coming into their plant by doing these things. So there's a lot of connections there. And I definitely appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy schedule to talk with us a little bit. And hopefully we can follow this up with some additional updates, maybe some partner updates or other information on our website around the water initiatives in the state of South Dakota. Thank you so much, Kevin. Do you have any parting words you want to share with our audience today?
No, just thank you, Sarah. And I urge everyone, if you haven't been to South Dakota yet, come visit us.
It's gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. If you don't come during hunting season, that's okay, but come during hunting season as well. No, we have great places, great faces. South Dakota, everybody's seen the commercial, but it is a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And yeah, we'd be happy to have you come out. So thanks again, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you too, Kevin. We appreciate you.
Yep, we'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This webinar series was made possible through funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's 5-Star and Urban Waters Restoration Grant Program. For more about WHC's support of 5-Star, or to learn how you can get involved and find funding for your water projects, visit wildlifehc.org/5star.